This wasn't just a great draft. It was a decision. Because the Cleveland Browns didn't just add players, they sent a message. And the deeper you look into what happened, the clearer that message becomes. Analysts, former players, even insiders are starting to say the same thing. This might have been one of the smartest drafts in the league this year. But here's the part nobody is talking about enough. It's not just who they drafted. It's why they drafted them. Because when you look at the offensive line upgrades, the wide receiver additions, and the way the roster is being shaped, it doesn't feel random. It feels targeted. And that's where things get interesting. Because while everyone is focused on the names, the Browns might already be focused on one player. And if you connect all the dots, it starts to look like Cleveland isn't just building a team anymore. They might be building around their future quarterback. At first glance, this looks messy. 4 quarterbacks in one room. Different styles. Different experience levels. And for a lot of fans, that immediately raises concerns. Too many players. Not enough reps. No clear direction. But once Todd Monken spoke on it, everything started to sound very different. Because he made one thing clear right away. Competition does not mean equality. He said it directly. Every player will compete, but not everyone will get the same number of reps. And that one statement changes everything. Because when a coach says that, he's telling you something without saying it outright. There is a structure. There is a hierarchy. There is a plan. It's just not being fully revealed yet. Because in the NFL, teams don't operate without a depth chart. They don't split reps evenly just to be fair. They allocate reps based on expectation, based on trust, based on who they believe gives them the best chance to win. And that's the key. Because while fans hear competition and think chaos, coaches hear competition and think evaluation within a structure. And that structure is already forming. Because if you listen closely to how Monken described it, he didn't say everyone is starting from the same place. He didn't say every quarterback has the same opportunity. He said everyone will get a chance, but the reps will be determined. And that word matters. Determined. That means controlled, planned, strategic, which means this isn't an open race. It's a managed process. And that's exactly how teams handle situations when they already have a direction in mind. Because they don't want chaos. They want clarity. They just don't always show it publicly right away. But here, where it gets even more interesting. Because once you accept that reps won't be equal, the next question becomes obvious. Who's getting the majority? Because in the NFL, reps are everything. More reps equals more opportunity. More opportunity equals more development. And more development usually points to one thing: the player you're investing in. And if you connect that with everything else the Browns just did in this draft, the answer starts to become very clear. But that's where the story takes a turn. Because what's happening behind the scenes might already be revealing who's leading this race. Once you understand that reps won't be equal, the entire situation starts to make sense. Because in the NFL, reps are currency. They tell you who the team is investing in. They tell you who's being developed. They tell you who the future might be. And based on everything coming out, it's starting to look like Shedeur Sanders is positioned to receive the majority of those meaningful reps. Now officially, nothing has been declared. No one has stood at the podium and said, he's QB1. And they won't. Not this early. But when you break down how these situations typically unfold, the pattern is clear. Because the Browns aren't just dealing with 4 random quarterbacks. They're dealing with roles. You have a veteran presence in Deshaun Watson. You have developmental options like Dylan Gabriel and Taylon Green. And then you have the player who the entire offseason seems to be quietly aligning around. That's not coincidence. That's direction. Because teams don't just hand out reps equally. They prioritize. They focus on the player they want to evaluate the most. The one they're building around. The one they need answers on. And that's where this becomes interesting. Because if Sanders starts getting the majority of first-team looks, if he starts running with the starters, if he's consistently the one being developed within the system, that's not just a camp decision. That's a signal, a strong one. But here's the part that makes it even more revealing. Because this isn't happening in isolation. It's happening alongside everything else the Browns just did. The offensive line upgrades, the wide receiver additions, the emphasis on building a better environment. All of that connects. Because teams don't invest like this unless they're preparing for something specific. And right now, it looks like they're preparing for him. Now, to be fair, this is still early. Nothing is locked in. And as always, performance will decide everything. But patterns matter. Trends matter. And right now, the trend is pointing in one direction. Because when a team controls reps, builds the roster, and shapes the system all at the same time, they're not guessing. They're planning. And that's exactly what this feels like. But here, where it gets even more convincing. Because if you really want to understand what a team believes, you don't just look at the reps. You look at how they built the team around them. And that's where the Browns might have already revealed everything. If you really want to understand what a team believes, don't just listen to what they say. Look at what they build. Because the Browns didn't just have a good draft. They had a purposeful one. And that's what analysts started picking up on almost immediately. Multiple voices across the league began saying the same thing. This might have been one of the most complete drafts this year. But it's not just about quality. It's about direction. Because when you break down the picks, a pattern starts to appear. Offensive line. Wide receivers. More offensive line. More weapons. That's not random. That's targeted. Because those are the exact areas you fix when you're trying to support a quarterback. Not just any quarterback. A young one. Because the biggest mistake teams make is throwing a quarterback into a weak environment. No protection. Limited weapons. No margin for error. And then they wonder why things don't work. But Cleveland, they're doing the opposite. They're building the environment first. Because when the situation is right, development becomes easier, faster, more stable. And that's exactly what this draft is setting up. Because every major move connects back to one goal. Make the offense easier to operate. Better protection means more time in the pocket. Better receivers mean more options. More options mean better decisions. And better decisions lead to better results. It's all connected. But here, where it gets even more interesting. Because this wasn't just about adding talent. It was about fixing weaknesses. The Browns' offensive line struggled last season. Ranked near the bottom in key metrics. That's not sustainable. So what did they do? They attacked it. They brought in players who can start. Players who can stabilize the line immediately. And that changes everything. Because once protection improves, the entire offense settles down. The quarterback doesn't have to rush. The playbook opens up. The timing improves. And suddenly, everything starts to click. But they didn't stop there. Because protection alone isn't enough. You need weapons, reliable ones, dynamic ones. And that's exactly what they added next, which is where the next part of this story becomes even more revealing. Because one of those weapons might be the most important piece of all. This is where the draft gets even more interesting. Because while a lot of people were focused on the big names, there was one player who quietly changed the entire conversation. KC Conception. And if you look at the numbers, it doesn't make sense why he wasn't getting more attention before the draft. We're talking about consistent production, 1,000-yard level output, 28 total touchdowns across his college career. That's not average. That's impact. But for some reason, he wasn't getting the same hype as other receivers. Names like Jordan Tyson, Carnell Tate, and others were getting more attention. Meanwhile, KC was sitting right there with better production. And that's where the slept-on narrative starts. Because sometimes, players don't get noticed until it's too late. Until a team takes them. Until they get placed in the right system. And that's exactly what might be happening here. Because KC isn't just a traditional receiver. He's versatile. He can operate in the short game. Screens, slants, quick outs. But he can also stretch the field. Win one-on-one. Create after the catch. And on top of that, he brings value in the return game, which means he's impacting multiple phases of the game. And that's rare, because when you draft a player like that, you're not just adding depth, you're adding flexibility. Because now the offense can do more, move faster, adapt to different situations. And that's exactly what helps a young quarterback. Because instead of forcing difficult throws, you can create easy completions, high percentage plays, ways to build rhythm early in drives. And that's how confidence builds. But here, where it gets even more important. Because KC doesn't just bring production, he brings reliability. Because players with consistent numbers over multiple seasons usually translate better. They understand timing. They understand spacing. They understand how to get open. And that's exactly what quarterbacks look for. Because when the game speeds up, they don't always look for the flashiest option. They look for the safest one, the one they trust. And KC has the potential to become that. Which is why this pick matters more than it looks. Because it's not just about adding a receiver. It's about adding a piece that fits perfectly into what the Browns are building. But here's the twist. Because as valuable as KC is, he might not even be the most impactful receiver they added. Because there's another player in this class. And his role could change everything. If KC brings versatility, then Denzel Boston brings something completely different. Control. Because Boston isn't built to win with quick cuts and separation. He wins in a way that's even more valuable in certain situations. He wins when things aren't perfect. At 6'4", with elite hands and a massive catch radius, he gives the offense something it didn't fully have before, a true outside presence. The kind of receiver you can trust even when coverage is tight. The kind of receiver you throw to when the play breaks down. And that's where this becomes huge for Shedeur Sanders. Because in the NFL, not every throw is clean. Not every read is perfect. Sometimes the pocket collapses early. Sometimes the timing is off. Sometimes the defense wins the play. And in those moments, quarterbacks rely on receivers who can still make it work. That's Boston. Because with his size, he doesn't need perfect separation. He just needs a chance. A jump ball. A back shoulder throw. A red zone fade. And suddenly, what looks like a low percentage play becomes a real opportunity. And that changes play calling. Because now, instead of avoiding tight coverage, you can attack it. You can trust your receiver to win. And that gives the offense more options, more confidence, more flexibility. But here, where it gets even more interesting. Because Boston doesn't just compliment KC. He contrasts him. Because now the Browns have two very different types of weapons. KC quick, explosive, versatile. Boston big, physical, reliable in tight windows. And when you combine those two styles, defenses have a problem. Because they can't play one way anymore. If they focus on speed, they get beat by size. If they focus on size, they get exposed by quickness. And that's how balanced offenses are built. Not with one star, but with pieces that force defenses to adjust constantly. And that's exactly what Cleveland just created. But here's the deeper layer. Because this isn't just about receivers. It's about how all of this connects back to the quarterback. Because now, Sanders isn't walking into a limited system. He's walking into options. Real options. And when a quarterback has options, the game slows down. Decisions become easier. Confidence builds faster. And performance improves. That's the effect. And that's why this move matters so much. But here, where everything starts to come together. Because when you combine these weapons with the protection they added, the offense doesn't just improve. It transforms. Weapons get the attention, but protection decides everything. Because you can have speed, size, and playmakers across the field. But if the quarterback doesn't have time, none of it matters. And that's exactly why the Browns attacked the offensive line the way they did. They didn't just add depth. They added answers. Because last season exposed a major issue. This line wasn't holding up. Rankings near the bottom, constant pressure, disrupted timing. It made everything harder than it needed to be. So what did Cleveland do? They fixed it at the source. They brought in linemen who can step in and stabilize things immediately. Players with strong hands, good feet, and the ability to control defenders instead of reacting to them. And that changes everything. Because once the pocket becomes reliable, the entire offense settles down. The quarterback isn't rushing. He's reading. He's progressing. He's operating within structure instead of escaping chaos. And that's the difference between surviving and actually developing, which is huge for Shedeur Sanders. Because young quarterbacks don't struggle because they lack talent. They struggle because the environment around them is unstable. Too much pressure, too many broken plays, too many forced decisions. But when protection is solid, the game slows down. The reads become clearer. The timing improves. And suddenly, everything starts to connect. But here, where it gets even more important. Because protection doesn't just help the quarterback. It helps the entire system. Because now deeper roots have time to develop. Receivers can run full concepts. Play action becomes more effective. The run game improves. Everything becomes more balanced. And that's what Cleveland is building. Not just an offense with talent, but an offense with structure. Because structure creates consistency. And consistency is what wins games. But here the key. Because when you combine protection with the weapons they added, you don't just get improvement, you get transformation. Because now the quarterback has time and options. And that combination is powerful. Because it removes excuses. It removes limitations. It creates opportunity. And once that opportunity is there, the only thing left is execution. which leads to the biggest question of all. Because when everything is set up like this, when the system is built, the protection is fixed, and the weapons are in place, there's only one thing left to figure out. Who is this all really for? At this point, it's not just about upgrades. It's about alignment. Because when you step back and look at everything the Browns have done, the quarterbacks in the room, the rep structure, the offensive line fixes, the new weapons, it all starts pointing in the same direction. And that direction keeps leading back to Shedeur Sanders. Now, to be clear, no one has officially said he's the guy. And that's intentional, because teams rarely reveal that publicly this early. But they don't need to, because in the NFL, actions speak louder than announcements. And right now, the actions are stacking up. Because think about it, you don't invest in protection like this unless you want your quarterback to stay clean. You don't add multiple receiver types unless you want your quarterback to have options. You don't structure reps unless you already know who you want to evaluate the most. And when all of that happens at the same time, it's not coincidence. It's coordination. Because teams don't operate randomly. Every move connects. Every decision builds on the last. And when you follow that chain, you start to see the bigger picture. Because this isn't just about competing quarterbacks. It's about preparing one. Preparing him to step into a system that's ready. A system that's stable. A system that's designed to help him succeed early. And that's what makes this so important. Because most quarterbacks don't get this kind of setup. They walk into incomplete situations. They have to fix problems instead of just playing. But this looks like the opposite. It looks like a situation being built before the pressure arrives. And that's rare. But here, where it gets even more interesting. Because when a team builds like this, they're not just thinking about development. They're thinking about timeline. Because once the structure is in place, the expectation follows. Because now, success isn't something that might happen. It's something that should happen. And that raises the stakes. Because now it's not about patience. It's about execution. Because when everything is aligned, there's nowhere to hide. No excuses. No delays. Just results. And that's the moment Cleveland is moving toward. But here's the final layer. Because once a team reaches this point, there's only one thing left to determine whether the belief they're showing right now is actually going to be proven right. Now everything comes down to one thing: execution. Because all the planning, all the upgrades, all the strategy we've just broken down, none of it matters if it doesn't translate on the field. And that's where the truth always comes out. Not in interviews, not in draft grades, not in off-season hype. On Sundays, because that's when roles become real. That's when trust shows up. That's when the offense reveals what it actually is. And for the Browns, this is bigger than just another season. Because they didn't just improve the roster. They built a system with protection, with weapons, with structure, a system designed to give a quarterback every chance to succeed. And when a team does that, they're not hopping anymore. They're expecting. And that expectation changes everything. Because now, if Shedeur Sanders steps in and performs, this won't feel like development. It'll feel like arrival. It'll feel like the moment the Browns finally found their direction. But if things don't click, then all of these moves get questioned. The draft, the strategy, the plan, everything. That's the reality. Because when you build this much around one idea, you have to get it right. But here's the part that makes this so interesting. Because either way, the Browns have already made their move. They've already shown what they believe. Not through words, through actions, through how they built this team, through how they structured this offseason. And that's what makes this moment different. Because now, it's not about guessing anymore. It's about seeing it play out. Because the setup is there. The pieces are in place. The opportunity is real. So now the only question left is simple. Did the Browns just build the perfect situation for their future quarterback? Or are we about to find out it wasn't enough? Because the answer to that question is going to define everything that comes next.